the House chamber fell completely silent as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett calmly approached the podium. Moments earlier, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene had unleashed a blistering verbal attack during the Oversight Committee hearing, her voice echoing through the chamber as she pointed accusingly at Crockett. The outburst had been triggered by Crockett's proposed amendment to a controversial education bill. As Greene's tirade reached its crescendo, cameras captured Crockett's measured response. Without raising her voice or showing signs of agitation, she adjusted the microphone slightly and began speaking. "I appreciate my colleague's passion," Crockett said, her voice steady and clear. "But I brought something today that might help clarify the misconceptions we just heard, actual facts, supported by evidence." She held up a document with highlighted sections. Greene, still standing and visibly fuming, suddenly froze as Crockett continued with unwavering composure. The stark contrast between Greene's emotional outburst and Crockett's poised rebuttal created an instantly memorable visual that would soon captivate millions across America. Before we explore this remarkable exchange further, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more exclusive coverage of the most impactful political confrontations. Jasmine Crockett had built her reputation in Congress through methodical preparation and legal precision. Before her 2022 election to represent Texas's 30th congressional district, Crockett had established herself as a civil rights attorney and state representative known for her ability to remain composed under pressure. Her background in constitutional law and criminal justice reform had prepared her for the intense scrutiny of national politics. At 42, Crockett represented a new generation of lawmakers who approached political discourse with both academic rigor and practical experience in advocacy. Her colleagues frequently noted her exceptional ability to translate complex legal concepts into accessible explanations, a skill developed during her years representing clients from marginalized communities. Marjorie Taylor Greene, by contrast, had cultivated a political brand built on confrontation since her election to represent Georgia's 14th congressional district in 2020. The 49-year-old congresswoman had become known for her provocative statements, unwavering support for former President Trump, and willingness to engage in heated exchanges both in committee hearings and on social media. Her direct, often combative approach had earned her both devoted followers and fierce critics. The tension between these two representatives had been building for months. Greene had previously targeted Crockett during debates over judicial nominees and immigration policy, often interrupting her statements with objections. Crockett had consistently responded with measured rebuttals rather than matching Greene's confrontational. The specific conflict began during consideration of H.R. 7492, the Educational Freedom and Transparency Act, which contained provisions that would limit certain curriculum content in schools receiving federal funding. Crockett had proposed Amendment 217, which would require educational materials to include historically accurate information about civil rights movements and constitutional protections against discrimination. Greene had vehemently opposed the amendment, characterizing it as radical indoctrination during committee discussions. When the bill reached the House floor for debate, tensions escalated as Greene used her allotted time to launch a personal attack on Crockett's motivations and qualifications. What Greene hadn't anticipated was that Crockett, anticipating the confrontation, had arrived that morning with a carefully organized binder containing historical documents, legal precedents, and direct quotes from Greene's previous statements, all methodically arranged to counter expected objections. The stage was set for a confrontation between two fundamentally different approaches to political discourse: Greene's emotional intensity versus Crockett's evidence-based precision. The House chamber buzzed with the usual activity of a contentious legislative session. Representatives moved between conversations, staffers delivered last-minute notes, and the gallery visitors observed the proceedings. The Speaker had just recognized Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene for her allotted 5 minutes regarding Amendment 217 to H.R. 7492. Greene approached the podium with characteristic energy, adjusting the microphone before launching into her remarks. "Mr. Speaker, I rise today to strongly oppose this amendment," she began, her voice already rising with intensity. "What we're seeing from the representative from Texas is nothing short of an attempt to force radical ideology onto our children's education." The chamber quieted as Greene's volume increased. "This amendment isn't about historical accuracy or civil rights, as she claims. It's about pushing a divisive agenda that seeks to indoctrinate rather than educate." Greene stepped away from the podium, gesturing dramatically toward Crockett's direction. The gentlewoman from Texas pretends this is about history, but we all know it's about ideology. She wants schools to teach children to judge each other based on race rather than character. Her voice now approaching a shout, Greene continued. I've had enough of these attacks on our values disguised as education. The American people are tired of representatives like Miss Crockett trying to turn our classrooms into progressive training camps. Cameras captured Crockett calmly taking notes, her expression neutral despite the escalating personal attacks. Greene's voice reached its peak volume. The representative from Texas might have a law degree, but she clearly doesn't understand the Constitution or what parents actually want for their children's education. This amendment is outrageous and must be rejected. As Greene's time expired, the Speaker recognized Congresswoman Crockett for her response. The contrast was immediately apparent as Crockett approached the podium with measured steps, arranging her materials methodically before addressing the chamber. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Crockett began, her voice even and professional. I appreciate my colleague's passion, though I must correct several mischaracterizations of my amendment. She opened her binder and continued. Amendment 217 simply ensures that educational materials include historically accurate information about our nation's civil rights movements and constitutional protections against discrimination. This isn't partisan, it's factual. Crockett held up the first document from her binder. I have here the exact text of my amendment alongside Supreme Court decisions, affirming that accurate historical education serves a compelling governmental interest. I'd like to enter these into the record. Greene attempted to interject from her seat, but Crockett continued without acknowledging the interruption. My colleague from Georgia suggested this amendment would indoctrinate rather than educate. However, the language explicitly requires materials to be historically accurate and age-appropriate, with citations to primary sources. Crockett then displayed a second document. Interestingly, in 2019, before her election to Congress, Representative Greene publicly supported teaching the complete American history, including the difficult parts in an interview with her local newspaper. I have the transcript here. A murmur spread through the chamber as Greene visibly reacted to her own words being quoted back to her. Additionally, Crockett continued, this amendment contains the exact same enforcement mechanisms as the underlying bill that the representative from Georgia co-sponsored. It simply applies those standards to ensure historical accuracy about civil rights alongside the bill's other educational priorities. Greene rose to her feet. Point of personal privilege, Mr. Speaker. The gentlewoman is misrepresenting my position. The Speaker intervened. Does the gentlewoman from Texas yield? I do not yield at this time, Crockett responded calmly. I am simply quoting the representative's public statements and comparing the text of her bill with my amendment. Crockett continued methodically addressing each accusation Greene had made, countering emotional claims with documented evidence. When Greene again attempted to interrupt, now shouting from her seat, Crockett paused briefly, took a sip of water, and resumed with the same measured tone. My colleague suggests I don't understand the Constitution, Crockett noted. As a constitutional attorney who has argued before federal courts, I respectfully disagree. In fact, my amendment directly references the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause and subsequent Supreme Court interpretations. She held up another document. I've prepared a legal analysis comparing the amendment's language with relevant constitutional precedent. I'm happy to share this with any colleague interested in the legal foundation of this proposal. Greene, now visibly frustrated by her inability to rattle Crockett, rose again. Mr. Speaker. Point of order. The gentlewoman is attacking me personally. The Speaker responded. What is the gentlewoman's point of order? Greene struggled to articulate a procedural violation, eventually claiming, she's questioning my motives and intelligence. I see no violation of House rules. The Speaker ruled. The gentlewoman from Texas may continue. Crockett nodded appreciatively. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to be clear that I'm not questioning anyone's intelligence or motives. I'm simply providing factual context for my amendment and addressing specific claims made about its content. As Greene became increasingly agitated, Crockett maintained her composure, continuing to systematically dismantle each objection with evidence rather than emotion. The contrast became more pronounced with each exchange, Greene's interruptions growing louder while Crockett's responses remained measured and substantive. As Crockett approached the conclusion of her allotted time, she addressed the fundamental misconception that had fueled Greene's outburst. Mr. Speaker, my colleague from Georgia claimed that this amendment would, and I quote, judge children based on race rather than character. This fundamentally mischaracterizes both the letter and spirit of the proposal. Crockett lifted a final document, a single page that she held toward the letter last chamber. This amendment contains exactly 147 words. Not once does it mention judging anyone. It simply requires that educational materials include historically accurate information about our nation's civil rights movements and constitutional protections. She paused, making eye contact with colleagues across the chamber. I've practiced law long enough to know that when someone misrepresents a document this profoundly, it suggests they either haven't read it or are deliberately mischaracterizing it for political effect. Greene, unable to contain herself, stood again. "How dare you question my integrity?" she shouted, her voice echoing through the chamber. This is exactly the kind of condescending attitude that the American people are sick of. The speaker called for order as murmurs spread through the chamber. Crockett waited for quiet before responding. Her voice remained steady, creating a stark contrast with Greene's emotional outburst. "I haven't questioned anyone's integrity. I've simply noted a discrepancy between the actual text of my amendment and how it has been characterized. This isn't personal, it's legislative precision." She closed her binder and continued, "I believe our constituents send us here today. Engage with the actual content of legislation, not to create straw-man arguments about proposals we dislike. The American people deserve representatives who prioritize accuracy over emotion when debating laws that affect their children's education." Turning directly to address her colleagues rather than responding to Greene, Crockett delivered her closing argument. "This amendment doesn't advance any ideology beyond the belief that American students should learn accurate history, including the difficult parts. It doesn't require specific conclusions, only factual information." She glanced briefly at Greene before concluding, "I respectfully ask my colleagues to evaluate Amendment 217 based on its actual text rather than mischaracterizations. Our differences of opinion are legitimate, but they should be grounded in the reality of what we're voting on, not caricatures of each other's positions." As Crockett returned to her seat, the chamber erupted in applause from many members. Unusual for a routine amendment debate. Greene remained standing, attempting to be recognized again, but the speaker moved to the vote. "The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Texas," the speaker announced. "Those in favor, say aye." A strong chorus of ayes filled the chamber. Those opposed, no. The noes were notably less unified than expected given the controversial nature of the bill. "In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it," the speaker declared. "The amendment is agreed to." Greene immediately demanded a recorded vote, which would require members to go on record with their positions. When the electronic voting system closed 15 minutes later, Amendment 217 had passed 285 to 142, with 43 Republicans joining Democrats in support an unusual bipartisan outcome for a contentious education bill. Several Republican representatives who had originally planned to vote against the amendment had changed their positions after witnessing the exchange. As the post-result appeared on the chamber's display boards, Greene could be seen in animated conversation with colleagues, gesturing toward Crockett, who sat quietly reviewing notes for upcoming business. The visual contrast between Greene's continued agitation and Crockett's composed focus only reinforced the dynamic that had defined their exchange. What had begun as an attempt to publicly undermine Crockett's amendment had instead resulted in unexpected support for it, demonstrating the persuasive power of evidence-based argument over emotional appeals, a rare victory for substantive debate in an increasingly polarized Congress. As representatives exited the House chamber following the vote, congressional staffers were already fielding calls from reporters seeking comment on what many were describing as the Crockett-Greene showdown. What none of them yet realized was how quickly the contrast between Greene's emotional outburst and Crockett's composed response was resonating beyond Washington. Within 30 minutes, clips of the exchange began circulating on social media platforms. The C-SPAN footage, normally watched only by political insiders, was being shared at an extraordinary rate. One clip, showing Greene shouting, "How dare you question my integrity?" followed immediately by Crockett's calm, "I haven't questioned anyone's integrity. I've simply noted a discrepancy between the actual text of my amendment and how it has been characterized," was viewed over 2 million times within the first hour. By evening, major news networks had picked up the story. Political analysts from across the spectrum weighed in on what made the exchange so compelling. A veteran CNN correspondent observed, "What we witnessed today wasn't just a policy disagreement, it was a clash between two fundamentally different approaches to political discourse." Meanwhile, a Fox News analyst noted, Representative Crockett's preparation was evident. Whether you agree with her position or not, she came armed with facts rather than just opinions. The following morning, newspaper headlines captured the significance of the moment. The Washington Post ran with "Composure Prevails: How Crockett's Evidence-Based Response Changed Votes," while the Wall Street Journal opted for "Fact versus Fury. Unexpected bipartisan support follows House floor confrontation." Even local papers in Greene's Georgia district covered the exchange, with one headline asking, "Does emotional advocacy still work when countered with facts?" Social media platforms saw the emergence of the hashtag number #CalmClapback, with users across the political spectrum sharing examples of maintaining composure in confrontational situations. Teachers reported using the clip in government and debate classes as an example of effective persuasion techniques. For Crockett, the aftermath brought both opportunities and challenges. Interview requests poured in from major networks, and her social media following increased by over 300,000 inches just 2 days. Her office reported a significant uptick in donations, many from first-time contributors who cited her fact-based approach as their motivation. More substantively, several committee chairs reached out to express interest in her co-sponsoring legislation, including representatives who had previously kept their distance. A senior congressman with 30 years of experience told reporters, "Representative Crockett demonstrated something we need more of in this institution: the ability to disagree without being disagreeable, and to stand firm without becoming inflammatory." Greene's response followed a different trajectory. Initially, she doubled down on her criticism, posting a series of tweets characterizing Crockett as condescending and elitist. However, when these posts received mixed reactions even from her supporters, with many commenting that they preferred fighting spirit backed by facts, Greene pivoted to focusing on the underlying bill rather than the personal confrontation. 3 days after the exchange, polling among constituents in both representatives' districts revealed an interesting pattern. While Greene's base supporters remained loyal, independent voters expressed greater confidence in legislation backed by factual evidence rather than emotional appeals. In Crockett's district, her approval rating increased by 12 points, with particular gains among moderate voters who appreciated her professional approach. Perhaps the most significant outcome came 2 weeks later during consideration of another controversial bill. Representatives from both parties could be observed arriving at debates with noticeably more documentation and specific textual references. Committee chairs began more frequently asking members to point to the specific language they were objecting to rather than speaking in generalizations. A veteran congressional staffer commented to Politico, "We're seeing what some are calling the Crockett effect: members coming to debates better prepared with actual evidence rather than just talking points. It won't last forever, but right now, there's a premium on being able to cite specific facts rather than just express outrage." 6 months later, a study by the Congressional Research Service confirmed that the rate of amendments passing with bipartisan support had increased by 14% since the Crockett-Greene exchange, with the strongest predictor of crossover votes being the presence of factual documentation directly addressing opposing concerns. For everyday Americans watching Congress, the exchange represented something many had believed was disappearing from political discourse: the power of composed, evidence-based argument to persuade rather than simply inflame. Comment sections across platforms reflected this sentiment, with one particularly shared response noting, "I don't care which side you're on, watching someone stay calm and come with receipts instead of just yelling louder is satisfying." As future congressional sessions faced increasingly complex challenges, the Crockett-Greene moment became a reference point in orientation materials for new representatives, an example of how preparation and composure could sometimes accomplish what volume and intensity could not. The legacy of that confrontation transcended the specific amendment or even the representatives involved. It demonstrated that in an era often dominated by the loudest voices, there remained a place for and public appreciation of those who chose to counter shouting with substance. Thank you for watching this analysis of this pivotal congressional confrontation. If you found value in seeing how composed, fact-based responses can transform political discourse, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below.